Hello, Wayne. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
And you guys are muted at the moment, which is why I couldn't hear you, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
It's very nice being with you remotely. You probably don't want the cold I may be getting.
So since you have an excuse, does that mean you count towards quorum?
Well, it's interesting. The excuse that I have,
Is you're sick?
well, no, the excuse on that the symbol, that means that I have a disability.
Oh, so
Okay.
that means you count towards quorum.
Well, yes and no. I have a disability that, and sorry about the complication. I have a disability that comes and goes. Every now and then I have a condition and I basically can't walk. And at that point, I'm literally disabled. And at that point, I would use the disability so that I could vote because at that, but at this point, I am not disabled. I can dance around the room. You probably don't want to see that, but um, I just have a cold, so I don't count for the quorum.
Okay,
How honest. Yeah.
and I see Indiana online. Can I have the sign-in sheet?
Hello.
Count towards. Hi, Indiana.
And I do count towards quorum.
I was gonna say, you do count towards quorum.
Thank you.
Wayne is about to fake your signature, India.
No, I'm not.
I'm sorry I couldn't join in January. I extended my trip at home, so I wasn't back yet.
We need one more person for quorum. Then again, we don't have any action items, so we can really begin.
Star.
Yeah, you could put that back. And who do we have here? Good.
Chris is absent. Tracy is removed.
But she's not on yet, so,
Yeah.
right.
Oh, she's here.
Hello, OC. We just made quorum.
Okay. You live to make quorum.
You live to make quorum. I don't know why I have a double image here.
I have to go.
So, good evening. You're allowed to speak. No. So I'm Wayne Benjamin. I chair land use for Manhattan Community Board 12. Welcome to the February 2025 meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to have my fellow committee members introduce themselves. So starting at my left.
My name is Vivian Ducat, and I'm a public member for more than 15 years of the Land Use Committee, and I live in Washington Heights.
Hi, I'm Elsa Kaminer.
And I'm Heidi Guzman. I'm the assistant chair of this committee.
And we have two members on Zoom. Indiana, why don't we begin with you?
Hello, all. My name is Indiana Porta, and this is my first year on this committee. I think that's it. What was the other thing? That was it?
That was it. Just introduce yourself. Jim.
I'm Jim Berlin. I'm also a member of the Land Use Committee, and you may have noticed I also seem to be the board parliamentarian. I'm so happy to be with you.
Thank you, Jim. We have a large contingent of students from Columbia's urban planning program. So I told them they are welcome to join us at subsequent meetings as well, because the agenda for tonight is rather light, but in meetings past, if you've heard about the City of Yes, we dealt with the City of Yes for, sustainability. We dealt with the City of Yes for housing opportunities. We dealt with the City of Yes for economic opportunities. So those were, lively conversations. And last month's meeting, we were speaking with representatives of the Department of City Planning about the commitments made by the city of New York to our then council member Udonis Rodriguez and the speaker in connection with the Inwood rezoning, which you might have heard about, which took place, I believe, in 2018. And there are 39 commitments in various areas for, housing, open space, parks, infrastructure that over the years are supposed to be implemented. And we were discussing how we get updates on the status of those. And actually, that is the one item on the agenda that I have to update on. Oddly enough, the Department of City Planning was not the lead for that rezoning. It was the Economic Development Corporation. And so although the Department of City Planning typically have representatives come to our meetings, share things with us and just listen, they are not the ones to provide us with the updates. And they were giving us some background on that. So subsequent to the meeting, the board chair and I, the board chair being Catherine Diaz, we had a meeting with Jana Orleski and Adam Meager, who are from the Economic Development Corporation, as well as Douglas Hardella, who works with the first deputy mayor, Maria Torres Springer, to find out the process by which CB12 will obtain the comprehensive update on the points of agreement. And the takeaways from that meeting are as follows. There is a commitments tracker that was created, but when we checked, at last meeting, it was a year or more out of date. So that commitments tracker is being updated, and it either is updated as of the end of January or early this month. EDC will actually provide us with the updated tracker when it is ready, so we don't have to go looking for it. After CB12 has reviewed the updated information, we can identify the areas where we have questions or want clarifications, or just more detail. We're planning on a spring 2025 multi-agency presentation where we can get a comprehensive update, because I don't think we've had one in several years. I think when the Eliza, which is a mixed-use development, when that was breaking ground was the last time we had any sort of update. So that was a couple of years ago. Now, and that probably will be a very interesting meeting for, urban planning students to attend. Once we, structure our questions, it is, the combination of EDC, the first deputy mayor, and the mayor's office for planning and policy that will be responsible for consistently providing us with the update. So it's not in Department of City Planning's ballpark to do that. It is, and they committed to this. It's EDC, the first deputy mayor, and the mayor's office for policy and planning. So, that is, the update. And I shared most of this with the committee members via email, but since this was sort of a lengthy discussion at last month's meeting, I wanted to share it, publicly so folks know where we are and, what to expect moving forward with regard to that. And before I move on with other updates, are there any questions from either the committee or from our guests? Heidi.
My question is, given that it's a multi-agency response, is there like a primary contact person that's been established, or is that TBD?
Well, the primary contact, I believe, is going to be Douglas
Okay.
in the first deputy mayor's office, but it's a combination of EDC, the first deputy mayor, and the mayor's office of planning and policy that are responsible for the updates. And I will confirm, but I think Doug is our point person.
I made it.
You made it. Congratulations. Anything from our planning students? No? If you've left email addresses on the sign-in sheet, if you do not already have the points of agreement, I'm pretty certain the document's available online. We can have it emailed to you so you can review it to see what we're talking about. And as we are developing questions about the status, you may want to develop your own questions. And as I said, when we have that multi-agency presentation, it would be something I think that's interesting for you to attend and, dig into, where things are and how the city government works. Okay, so there were a couple of presentations that were tentatively scheduled for today that were pushed to either March or April. And so let me talk about March. So our March 5th meeting, we're actually having two presentations that are related to sort of sustainability issues. We have the New York City Accelerator Program and an organization called Inclusive Windows, and they're going to do presentations on two separate presentations on sustainability and energy efficiency. And the window presentation specifically, or that organization is going to talk about, passive house design and energy efficient windows. So that is what's happening on March 5th. And I think we may also have this is going to be in April. So in April, there's an organization called FloodNet NYC that was scheduled to do a presentation tonight. They're going to present in April on real-time flood sensing. And FloodNet is a multi-year partnership between CUNY, NYU, and various offices of city government, including DEP, to develop and implement tools for real-time urban flood monitoring in flood-prone neighborhoods. And there are certain areas in Inwood, particularly along the Harlem River, that are flood-prone. And when we had Superstorm, I believe the A-Train yard was underwater, as well as other areas. FloodNet has funding from DEP. They have mission to install 500 sensors throughout the city, and to date, they've installed 240, so it's a little less than half. And, through community engagement, they work to bring communities up to speed on what the program is, and they're meeting with us as part of that outreach. And just for information, between 2012 and 2021, this land use committee passed, and the community board, the full board, adopted 3 resolutions related to flooding, waterfront design, and resiliency. And they include comment on the Department of Cities Planning zoning for coastal and flood resiliency text amendment. We supported a resolution to enhance waterfront edge design guidelines. And we also supported the city planning's 197A plan to revise the city's waterfront revitalization program. So this committee and the board have a history of looking at and addressing issues pertaining to planning and flooding and waterfront. So this is, I guess, a continuation of that, and I'm interested to see what they have to say.
Marcia,
Yes.
is that separate from what the MTA is doing for flood mitigation?
We will ask them when they get here.
Huh,
Because I have no background on them. They reached out to us. They wanted to present to us, so I don't know what they're doing. Jim?
That's
muted.
exactly what I wanted to comment on, because the MTA, after the flooding that they had, came to us. It's a citywide thing they're doing, about specific flood mitigation they had already designed and planned for this train yard. And of course, so and I think we got an interim report somewhere along the line, because they showed us some walls or something. And again, we'll hear more, but that piece of it is definitely being worked on.
Yeah. And they did not mention anything about the train yard. I mentioned that as an example of a flood-prone area of the neighborhood. In the city agencies they mentioned as part of their partnership, the MTA is not one of them. And just to back up to our February meeting, at that meeting, as you know, the committee passed a resolution supporting the proposed Washington Heights Health Center building envelope project. And the Department of Design and Construction was meeting with the Public Development Committee prior to our general meeting. So it went to the Executive Committee. The Executive Committee approved that resolution. The resolution and the project plans were submitted to PDC, by the February 21st deadline. At the general meeting, the full board ratified the resolution that was adopted or approved by the Executive Committee. And DDC expects to either have the project approved or comments received from, PDC by the end of this month. So that's where we are on the resolution last month. That is where we are on the April urban flood census. We will also have an April presentation from the Hispanic Society on yet another phase of, their capital project,
Okay,
their never-ending multi-million-dollar capital project.
yeah,
And that is, what I have for tonight's meeting, because as I mentioned, we had a couple of presentations scheduled that are now moved to subsequent months. And before anyone asks, I checked and no, we do not have a response on the former writing side.
Steve's not here.
Steve's not here, but we're here. So before we get into, I guess, old business and new business, I mean, we have a large, contingent of, and before we get into that, Tracy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Tracy McNeil, Land Use Board member, running a little late this evening. Happy to be here.
And Tracy, I mentioned earlier that we have a group of Columbia urban planning students with us. So having a light agenda, this gives us the opportunity to engage with them a bit to see what they are doing, what their interests are, and perhaps to have them, come back and engage, with us on subsequent meetings.
My father was a Columbia urban planning student circa, let's see if I could do math, like 64,
Yes.
64-ish, 65, and then was a professor through 73 at Columbia before
who
he
is your-
moved over. What?
Who is your father?
Oh, some dude.
Some dude.
No, he that was not kind. He was a professor by the name of William Garrison McNeil. And he was then a professor at City College School of Architecture after Columbia for 30 plus years, and which you will all be as you'll grow and be able to point around the city, be like, I designed this, I designed that. So
Worked on that zoning text amendment. I worked on that zoning text amendment.
Exactly. And then your children will be on community board land use. Dun, dun, dun.
So it's all mapped out for you. So what are some of the things that you are currently, studying and focused on, or what would you like to focus on?
So I'll start. Maybe I'm one of the co-professors and then another student can fill in. So we are focusing specifically on affordable housing in the neighborhood, which obviously is very broad. We just did a very chilly sort of walking tour where we looked at some of the developments in the neighborhood, some public housing developments, some in Chilama, some privately owned affordable developments. Our partner is Law, Community Legal.
Oh, we know them well.
Sure. And so we're really at the very beginning stage of doing research and trying to download and learn about different developments and different city, state, some federal affordable housing policies and programs. So that once we partner and start meeting with CLAW, we can really dig into either potential sites for proposals or looking at so design on the one hand maybe, and then policy on the other hand. We're meeting with, for instance, like state legislators, Emily Gallagher, who's working past this social housing development authority bill, which is of course a new type of affordable housing that we don't really have the power to build yet, but she's working on it. We're working with a local city council member, some folks at HPD. We're trying to approach housing from all of these different angles, but here working directly with community board members and residents in the neighborhood. We're sort of in the initial stages of trying to get a download of the neighborhood. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything. They worked in pairs and each were assigned a development today that they researched and then sort of gave a spiel about as we stopped at each building. So maybe if somebody wants to share their building, they could, or if you all have any questions from what I just sort of presented.
There, you have somebody willing to.
Oh, yeah, for me, like.
A little
very-
louder.
Very nice to meet you, for us, like, it's very important to know what are your discussions too, so we can engage with you and, we already started, like, doing our work, like, it's a responsibility to know very well Washington Heights, so we are trying our best, like, doing the research. And of course, you know more than us, so we might like be talking to you and other like type people and actors to get more involved.
I would also, I have a suggestion and a question. Suggestion is you also reach out to meet with our Housing and Human Services Committee. And when is that, tomorrow?
Yes.
Yes.
Tomorrow.
Right, because, I mean, we deal with, land use and planning with, and we have passed a number of resolutions that address affordable housing, and even in the inward rezoning, which is only 11 pages long, there's a section that defines for us affordability, which is critical. And there are other resolutions we've passed where we've defined affordability and what makes sense, for CB12. So the suggestion is to reach out to our Housing and Human Services, introduce yourself and also follow them. The question is, how are you defining affordability?
Affordability, affordable to who? So if we're talking about Washington Heights, we need to understand what are the income tiers present here and who are in the most need. What kind of units are needed and maybe some sports element as well. That and also like you were discussing sustainability and the city is also trying to implement more sustainable features in current affordable housing projects. So it's a great point for us to consider and also research.
And when you sit down to speak with representatives from HPD, I would say one of the questions that you would want to ask, or one of the topics you want to get clarity on, is in fact how they define and how they, navigate this whole issue of affordability. Because using citywide data gives you one picture, and going neighborhood by neighborhood, what is moderate income citywide might as well be market rate in Washington Heights and Inwood. So it's, the term in and of itself becomes somewhat meaningless. And, looking at what are the income levels and how the supposed affordable housing project does or does not fit the income band, the housing needs in the area where it is being built, is a, question we deal with all the time.
Something we've talked about certainly in the first beginning weeks and in other courses and fall semester as well. I think that conversation is really relevant, and that's something where I think all of the students are concerned about. Just any type of regulated housing now is often considered affordable housing, even if it's 165% AMI, which is way beyond the median income in this neighborhood and in most neighborhoods actually. What was I gonna say? I actually was wondering that those points of agreement from that rezoning that you were discussing, I'm curious if anyone on the board has any comment on how, I mean, it sounds like EDC is not being super responsive in updating certain metrics or the tracker of that, but it's often the case, right, with these points of agreement that the city maybe isn't fully living up to their commitments or is kicking the can down the road or something like that. I'm curious if you have any thoughts or you think they've done actually a pretty good job of trying to commit to all of those
Well,
bullet points.
that is what we are trying to assess. I mean, the projects, the initiatives, programs that are included in the points of agreement are intended to be implemented over, I think it was over a decade. That's one of the things when you read our resolution, we were responding to what EDC basically, asked us to do. They said, don't respond just to the rezoning, because over the next decade, the city planned to invest X million dollars in a number of programs, and they wanted our input on, how we wanted those programs, structured. So it was not like the Eliza, it was not, there was one project that's going to be completed in 2 years and that's that. So one of the reasons we asked for the update is because it's been a while. So we know that the Inwood Library and the Eliza was done. We know that there's some, waterfront park projects that were done. But there are other affordable housing projects, there's infrastructure projects. HPD had as an RFP last year for a site on 9th Avenue. That would be, in theory, an affordable housing project would be one of the points of commitment, but there are, as I pointed out, there are 39 different commitments in maybe a half a dozen buckets, and land use certainly is not keeping track of all of that. But I'm also quite certain that Housing and Human Services and Parks and Culture and, Traffic and Transportation isn't necessarily, or over the last few years, hasn't, followed what's happening with each of them. So it's time for them to come to us with an update. There is a commitment tracker, which is useful, but when we looked at it, the tracker was last updated in 2023, which is problematic. The tracker would be an excellent tool if it is updated regularly, because then it's, data that is available to the public. But if you're a year and a half behind, you don't know what has happened since 2023. And that's one of the issues. But what do other folks think about?
I actually did check out that whole list and everything, and how one of them was like a PDF online, and the other one was the scrolling down menu. A lot of those I've seen in parks. I'm like, those are actually like done. Now that I know, it's actually much better just to go back with it. But it was a lot.
Mhm.
It was definitely a lot. Some of those I do remember seeing them. So I wasn't here for the first half of it, but I would think you had a more detailed description of whatever you spoke about.
It's basically what I emailed to, the update that I emailed to the committee before, the results of the meeting that Catherine and I had with EDC
That
and
was
the
pretty
mayor's
quick.
office. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that was just getting it on the record. So there was nothing more than that. But I mean, that's an excellent point. I mean, I would think that if I were the city of New York and we had a number of parks projects that were part of the commitment and they're done, that you'd want to be coming to us and say, hey, we've checked off that one, we checked off that one, we checked off that one, as opposed to, leaving it to us to say, oh, yeah, I remember seeing that in the Parks Committee and looking at the document, it's in there, so they are doing something.
No, it's super helpful to know.
Yeah,
It never crossed my mind, because I did see a lot of them, and they were like done, it was done. And it was like, what, from 2019, right?
It's starting in 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would think they'd want to take credit for that.
Wayne,
Yes, Jim.
I'm only raising my hand because I want to make sure you're aware, or maybe you're not, that there's a comment in the Q&A.
So, let me see if I can do something here. Because it will be better if the person addresses it live. Ryan. So Ryan, are you able to unmute yourself? Okay.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah, so for some reason, I cannot get Ryan to, so Ryan Dubois is with the New York City Commission on Human Rights. And this is on the topic of affordability and quality of life. Please feel free to reach out to him with concerns around civil and human rights that are pertinent to your purposes. His number is 212-416-0284. And his email is rdubois, DUBOIS, @cchr.nyc.gov. And Ryan, I'm assuming it's okay for our Columbia planning students to reach out to you? I'm waiting for him to reply. Yes.
I have a question. For your students.
Thank you, Ryan.
How far is like the area that you guys are looking at? Like which neighborhoods and like how far of a distance are you guys going?
That's also a topic. I don't know, actually, does somebody want to explain what we've discussed so far? In terms of boundaries and neighborhood, boundary sort of disagreements. I'm happy to, but that looks good.
We've been focusing mainly in the Washington Heights area. That I guess accomplishes from 157 up into 180 above, but not too much into the, I guess, east side into Inwood. So mostly.
Well, that's not a definition of Washington Heights, though.
Yeah, so we've talked about the fact that the neighborhood tabulation areas are different than the community board boundaries, which of course are different than city council district, which are different than what Google Maps says.
Yeah.
And so we are trying to focus, initially, the proposal was on Washington Heights specifically, but you know, for instance, a lot of data sets come out as all of CB12, and it's hard, if not impossible, to like parse out, especially some of the more intricate like housing data sets through the Furman Center or what have you, package things in terms of community boards. And so we haven't landed on specific boundaries. If you have especially boundaries in terms of like data sets that can be helpful, we're all ears.
Yeah.
But
I wonder if open data has that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't know about data set, but if you have data sets that allow you to pull up by census tract.
Yep.
And I know Department of City Planning certainly has that, you know, you can probably do a definition by census tract and make that your study area. But in terms of, you know, like Washington Heights and Inwood, Washington Heights, according to the community board level, you know, begins at 155th and goes, you know, and this becomes a topic of big, but typically up to Dyckman, not 180th. So 180th, you're still in the middle of it. And then from Dyckman until you fall off the island, you're in Inwood. So it's not an east-west when it comes to Washington Heights, Inwood. I mean, from river to river, it's Washington Heights, and from river to river, it's, you know, Inwood. And, you know, when you look at it, there are different areas, different neighborhoods of both Washington Heights, you know, and Inwood. And it's interesting when you look at some of that, you know, city planning data, in terms of, you know, density and age of buildings and income, you know, the larger areas break up into, you know, smaller areas. But, you know, from our perspective, Washington Heights go all the way to Dyckman. I see another hand from Jim. And from Vivian. Jim, you're still muted.
There we go. Thank you. I just wanted, but Wayne sort of alluded to the fact, there are some folks who think that Dyckman starts, I mean, not Dyckman, Inwood starts at the bottom of when Broadway gets to the bottom of the hill. So everything north of there is Dyckman. And then the only other complication with 155th Street is there's an area at the southern, at 155th Street off to the east, that's down below. It used to be where the polo grounds used to be. There's a project there called the Polo. That area down there below the hill, that is not part of our district either.
Right, though. But if you follow the topography, if you're up the hill on 155th Street, you're in Washington Heights, hence the Heights. If you're down the hill, you're where the old Polo Grounds used to be, which is where the Polo Grounds NYCHA development is, that is still part, that's the northernmost part of central Harlem.
I wonder that's like a good site to do like that whole, the master plan to get your thing all the way around. Cause that is a very cut.
Well, we will let CB10 do that.
Yeah, I was like thinking about that little piece of land. If it was open, if it was only open, you could just keep on going straight down, but yeah, that little piece of land, that's not really.
It's not that little.
It definitely is a lot, you know, but it just sucks that there's a fence right there.
Yeah.
Are you also looking at HDFCs or you're only looking at newer development?
Yeah, we've talked about HDFCs as well and some of the history there.
Is there a lot of them actually in this area?
And, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, our students dividing, basically dividing two phases. The first is the exploration and the second is the project. We are in the exploration phase, so we are not, like, our project's not completely defined yet. So we are studying, we are defining our boundaries, we are defining our objectives. So we don't have a lot of concrete answers yet, but we will, and we can share more.
We're mostly digging into history, into graphics, into census data. So we were just trying to get the overall picture of the neighborhood.
Do you have anything around HDFCs that you want to share or just there's a lot of in the area?
I don't, Wayne may not, but Wayne is the president of an HDFC board across the street from where I live. But there's definitely loosening of rules to a certain extent. I mean, there are 3 HDFCs I live at 157th and Riverside. He lives on the other side of the street. But there are HDFCs that now there's this formula for some of them. It's not the median income, it's maintenance plus utilities times 12 plus 6% of sales price times 6 or 7. And it used to be that it was 6% of the original $250 that people paid for their shares in their apartment. And now it's 6% of what the sale price now is. And that reinterpretation has really changed who can live in those particular HDFCs, of which there's 3 within 2 blocks from where I am, that it changes the whole level of what you can make and who you are, and therefore how expensive it plays back and forth the apartments can actually be.
So there is a group called the HDFC Coalition that you probably want to touch base and get the perspective because as Vivian had mentioned, I think between West Harlem and Washington Heights, you have the largest concentration of HDFCs in the city. But actually what Vivian just said, it's just the opposite. That formula is actually in the state law. It's in the private housing finance law. And some of the earliest HDFCs, if you look at their offering plans, like from the early 80s, and my HDFC was from like 1982, it used that language verbatim, so it's not new. But there are HDFCs that were created that didn't use that used a percentage of AMI that's adjusted by HPD, actually by HUD. There are others that use that 165%. So depending upon when the HDFC was incorporated and some of the mishigas around, what was happening, the rules differ, and that's one of the issues. It's not a consistent set of regulations. And years ago, I worked with an organization, Harlem Community Development Corporation. I was their director of residential development, and we get folks calling and saying they're in an HDFC and they know another HDFC that has a set of rules that allow them to do X. They want to do the same thing, and they want our advice. I said the first thing you have to do is read your governing documents, because if your governing documents set up a different set of rules, you can't just use the other building's rules. So there isn't, one set, and, some of the changes that folks are thinking about as new are actually just reflecting what was in the state law going back to, whenever it was actually written.
But Wayne, what's new is not the law, it's the interpretation. At least among certain HDFCs always take the 6% of the sales price. They're talking about $250. And what's new is taking it as 6% of something that people could never have imagined of the height.
But that is exactly the point. It's not the reinterpretation. And I was joking about were you alive in the 1980s, but if you could research the condition of the city in general and uptown neighborhoods and neighborhoods of Brownston, Brooklyn in the 1970s, even parts of the 1990s, what was the state of the real estate market? It was very depressed. And in some cases, the so-called experts said there was no market there. There was no value there. At one point, the city owned upwards of 60% of the residential housing stock in Upper Manhattan, and they wanted to get it off of, their books and onto, the rent roll or whatever. So, the idea that anything, in Harlem or Washington Heights would be worth anything was not conceivable when some of these buildings, were converted in the 80s or early 90s. And I was working on a project in probably the late 90s, and it was a new condo, and the most expensive unit was about $300,000. And we were trying to get Sony Mae, State of New York Mortgage Association, mortgage, and we were told by one of their underwriters that nothing in Harlem is worth $300,000. Without looking at comps or anything, it's just that, nothing was worth that. And so we were out of our mind. I'm working on another project where I think the average price per unit without subsidy was maybe $280, $290. And this was something where the organization that I was working on was, providing a pre-development loan. And the board approved the loan because they wanted to be supportive of us and the organization. But one of the board members said that, it was just not reasonable that anything in Harlem could sell for $280,000. So there is the change from there's no market there, it's not feasible. One of the lenders told me there were two markets in Harlem. There was the low-income market and the very low-income market. I was told by Black mortgage lenders at a bank that I will not mention, but it's a major bank, that the middle income Black purchaser or renter left Harlem in the 1950s, and they're never coming back. So fast forward to, $600,000 studio apartments today. So it's not so much the reinterpretation, it's the market has changed dramatically, and what people will imagine is doable was inconceivable 30 years ago when some of us were doing affordable housing projects. We have to fight to get someone to agree that you could rent a 2-bedroom for more than $400 a month.
That's something we're looking at is the long-term affordability, because just as you mentioned, a lot of HDFCs or maybe not limited equity, and so the resale prices weren't restricted, even as the incomes were restricted. And so now, an HDFC may sell for 600,000 or more, and yet the income restriction remains where person estimates still below 60,000 or whatever the number may be. And so we're trying to think of, as a studio, as we build out our proposal, how do we ensure long-term affordability while at the same time the economics make sense, while we're dealing with what these different parties are fighting for or interested in or have questions about. So that's really helpful background. It's something we've talked a little bit about, but we'll definitely dig more into.
Are you looking at the Mitchell Lama program?
Yeah, we just passed
Riverside Terrace.
River Terrace.
look at the Mitchell Lama program, and we'll talk about proposal to sort of revamp that for the 21st century, because obviously developments are being built, new construction through Richalama anymore, but there's proposals to sort of revamp the program at the state level.
All the way in the back.
Yeah, so the one we looked at was the Eliza apartment. I guess those were supposed to be 100% permanently affordable. I was wondering, one, I guess what the community response to that was, and how those apartments were dispersed, like was it a lottery or some other system, or, and I guess, do you have any insight on how that was impacted?
If you're speaking to Cloth can give you all the dirt on that. But no, the Liza, I think, is a excellent example of what makes sense in this community, because the funding program used is called ELA, extremely low income, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what it stands for. So I think the highest income is 60% of AMI. And that more or less reconciles with, what is, the AMI in the area. And the Cloth, and I think it's Children's Village, and the developer, work closely to provide, 1, 2, and some 3-bedroom apartments. And looking at the layouts, it's amazing what ADA has done, because complying with the, Americans with Disability Act, some spaces that would be feasible in some of the older Mitchell-Lamas. I was looking at the floor plans for Esplanade Gardens. The rooms are fine, but some of the hallways and the bathrooms, you couldn't get into them. They wouldn't be compliant. So they really worked on having not an overconcentration of small units, but working with ADA, but also having the library and the residential and a preschool and a STEM center and sort of a cultural arts space. Looking at it holistically. The housing, any of the housing that gets the city money has to go through lottery. I think it's called Housing Connect. The initial community reaction had nothing to do with affordability. It had nothing to do with who needed affordable housing. It was, oh my God, the building's too tall. And it is taller than the buildings in the area. The economics of it probably dictated that. I think from our perspective, at least from my perspective, the height is not objectionable, but what I found odd is the presentation focused on analyzing sort of the architectural context of the area, looking at the Art Deco details and the brick and whatever. And then when you got to what they were proposing for the facade, it's like, okay, so what does your analysis have to do with what you're proposing? Because it's absolutely alien architecturally to what's there.
But that architect was claiming that he was reflecting the deco that was around.
Yeah, but how?
Yeah, not at all. But that's like he had the chutzpah to actually say something like that, or maybe he believed in himself beyond what he should have.
And then have you seen the building next to it too? There's like another building right next to it.
There is a new building. The battery is running low on something that probably needs to be plugged in.
It's like it's a total like 180 from whatever the Eliza is in that block. I see it all the time. They're not too big. I see them. It's like okay.
I don't know. Maybe
the one across the street is like bigger.
Yeah, the Eliza is, I don't know. I just plugged it in.
Maybe it's from your computer, Wayne?
Is it down?
It's this one, I think, this was running low.
Okay.
All right, now it's gone.
Now
Okay, you got that one?
And this is the computer that's working.
Okay. So the Eliza is built on, the former public library. So it's like city-owned land. The site next to it, I believe, used to be a car wash.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, moving forward with the Eliza, incentivized a private developer to build a structure. It's not clear they would have done that if it were, just the same old public library.
I think the car wash is the other development next door. Was not included in the original Eliza building,
Well, none of
Right.
the privately owned sites were part of the Eliza. It was just the library,
just the library.
just the
Right,
library.
Right, but in terms, I want to say something about the height, and
Where is the charger? for
I-
this?
It may be this.
encourage you to look at the inward rezoning as it was proposed in our 11 pages resolution. And see how, see how different they are. With that, please visit the 30-story building on 207, that it's like a monstrosity of hideous. I don't know if anything, if this is like, if you need an example of how something can be hideous, this is it. Not just because of the height, but because they didn't even try to create a building that would have been somewhat acceptable if it was somewhat related in the design, some design elements, something that is related to what's going on in wood. So it's none of this. So this is an example of what not to do. Okay, it's a disaster. And what make it even more of highlight of how disaster it is the other two development next to it, which are lower in height, more acceptable, even though it's still high, but more acceptable. I think the one on the south side of 207, between the train, which is 10th and 9th, is to have a little more like some design elements that you can say, oh, right. But all of those three are not just like as if you took them from another place, nothing characteristic of Inwood. And if we're looking at you mentioned sustainability before, a number of years ago, I believe 2017-ish, we passed a resolution of this committee about how did we call it, Jim? The right to sunlight, meaning to utilize the roofs for production of electricity through solar, right? And the majority of the building in Inwood are roughly, I don't know the height, so probably 5, 6, 7-story buildings. So we could have had a carpet of solar arrays producing electricity, okay? And now with those high buildings, like look at the one on Nagel, not Nagel, the one on Sherman, right? That is really high on Sherman, not on Nagel.
Sherman and Broadway?
The 23-story.
Sherman and Broadway, yeah.
Yeah,
The one
okay.
down the hill from the cloisters?
Look at those development and see how they actually now obscure some of the sunlight. By that I mean, so the building to the north of this development are now, I'm like, they can't produce any.
What is happening with this?
They can't produce any electricity from solar. Now, take this and look at local law 97. And I'm sure you're all gonna figure out what it is, right? So if I am that building to the north of that building on Sherman and Broadway, and I can't use my roof to produce solar energy. So am I gonna get, which I know I won't, am I gonna get credit from the city or some write-off because I can't use my roof to produce what local law 97 is asking me now to do, right? Because we all have to reduce our carbon emission. So now I can't reduce my carbon emission in some points because of the development of the south of me. So what do we do? So what I'm saying, I'm not asking for an answer. I'm asking you to think about things like that and what happened when developer come in and said, hey, I'm going to give you, community center or kindergarten or you name it. And then what happened to the building next door to it? It's just something to always consider.
Jim, you're muted.
I'm working on it. I must have fat fingers tonight. I just want to amplify what OC said. It turns out there are whole sections of Washington Heights and Inwood and Harlem and the Bronx and Brooklyn, for example, where you have just square miles upon square miles of buildings that are all essentially the same height and do not cast shadows on one another's roofs and are a perfect place to build solar panels, photoelectric panels. Now, we actually passed a resolution, not that anything happened with it, asking the Department of City Planning to actually make this part of the zoning, that the light that comes onto your roof belongs to your building. And there is zoning like this in California, which has its own problems at the moment, but there is zoning like that. And that would mean someone couldn't block your light because you own this light and you can use it to make electricity. I mean, again, it's not acres and acres of roofs that are at the same height. It's square miles of roofs. You can generate huge amounts of electricity. You'd have, independence from the utility. It'd be far more reliable. I mean, but you can't allow buildings to block the sunlight of other buildings. So we actually started an initiative on this, and I just wanted to make sure, as Ossie did, that future land use experts understand that we've been, saying the right things for a long time, and the authorities then have to do them. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a departure from the comments about the building heights and the solar panels, but looking at some of your past district needs statements, seemed like land use and schools were like predominant feature. Obviously, affordable housing seems to be a consistent request the city pay more attention to, but land use and schools were sort of a mainstay for the last few years, but 2024, it switched to public safety and mental health. So I'm curious what necessarily went into the process of developing the needs statements. It comes from the executive order or the full board.
I would say it depends on what document you're looking at. If it's the physical narrative that's written up by the district manager, he may have done that. But if you look at every year we do a ranking of capital and expense projects, and mental health services, I think, has been a top priority for more than a decade. We unfortunately have, and may still have, a very high rate of teenage suicide, particularly around girls. And so, the need to address that, has been a top priority. So mental health services and, public safety and affordable housing. I mean, it's like from year to year, the particular project may change, but if you're looking at sort of clusters, I don't think it is flipped. In some cases, it may be that we have asked for certain things and we finally gotten them, so we're not harping about them. But that's not to say that affordable housing or schools are not still, a priority. So I would say it depends on the document you're looking at, but I mean, also look at it should be available, the ranking of capital and expense projects, because I think in any of them, you'll find that, affordable housing and land use issues are still right up there with public safety and, mental health. I will say that depending upon how long you've lived in, Washington Heights, Inwood, New York City in general, the crack epidemic is not at its height the way it was, let's say, in the 80s. And so the craziness, on the street is not what it was, which is not to say there are not public safety concerns.
More needles out there. There was one over whole Memorial Day weekend in the front of the Academy of Arts and Letters. And it was just like, we're back to another era, aren't we? I don't know if this is relevant to what you're interested in, but landlords are starting to change. It used to be a lot of families who, and I'm just noticing that they're outside companies from California. All of that that's happening elsewhere in the country is definitely happening here. It's like the next generation does not want to go into, into being landlords, and I guess it's seen as a worthwhile investment for people from total other places to come invest here. In fact, in my building, the sponsor, the landlord to the remaining rental tenants in what's otherwise a co-op is a company in England. So that is the kind of thing that probably would have never happened before.
It would have happened elsewhere in New York City.
Right, but not, I mean, you're looking at, the other thing, well, I don't know if this is quantifiable and therefore not interesting, but what I find interesting is that people never realize that Sugar Hill, which they associate with Hamilton Heights, actually continues into the 160s along Edgecombe Avenue. And so it's really one consistent neighborhood that has been divided sort of artificially. And that's, sort of a difference in community. And also just in terms of my experience of speaking to elders east of Broadway, at least in where I am in the 150s, people refer to it as Harlem. Like there's it's not, even though geographically and whatever it's called Washington Heights, to a lot of people it's not. It's a sort of who you are and perceptual and how long you lived there kind of association.
We have a current board member who grew up in that area, sort of in the 160s along Edgecombe. And she said when she was growing up, that was, Sugar Hill, they call it Harlem now. They call it Washington Heights now, but, there are a number of folks who, if you grew up there, if you grew up in sort of that strip between like Edgecombe and St. Nicholas, I remember one of our former board members, they never considered it Harlem. They never considered it Washington Heights. It was just Sugar Hill. And, if you just follow the topography on the top of the hill was that whole, stretch. And if you would look at some of the building types and even sort of the income, St. Nicholas and Edgecombe is a different area almost than between Broadway and Amsterdam. I remember an attorney who was like probably my father's generation said that he had uncles who lived on St. Nicholas Avenue, not far from here. And St. Nicholas Avenue was a very decent street. Anyone who was anyone in the African-American community wanted to be on Edgecombe Avenue because that was it. But you wouldn't be caught dead on Amsterdam Avenue. So it was like, different neighborhoods.
But that was true the whole way down.
Yeah.
When I was a child on the Upper West Side, Amsterdam Avenue was considered really bad and Columbus even worse. And you would have never thought that the gentrification would have come as it did starting in the late 70s. It's just things really, yes, that's part of this whole world. Things continue to change, and depending on how old you are, a different reality than the one that's present.
Jim?
Did it. Thank you. Two sets of comments. There was actually an article in the New York Times about what people call different parts of neighborhoods, and we were featured in it. And this is true. I said the same thing about Inwood. So, for example, Hudson Heights, which is where they claim I live in Washington Heights. I've always said that, but that was made up by real estate developers or someone. They do this stuff. The other thing is the Statement of District Needs is a very interesting document because it's the formal elucidation of what we think our needs are, but it's affected by current events. So, for example, the last few years, the Presbyterian Hospital, or whatever they call themselves now, they've been doing various cutbacks that have annoyed us. Like they closed mental health beds. And one thing we do in response to stuff like that, and I'm also a former chair of the board, is we will then put more emphasis in the statement of district needs to sort of reinforce the position that we want the mental health beds, or like currently they're trying to get rid of rehabilitation beds that are apparently very vital to many patients. So we might talk about that. So that it's an evolving document. So I wanted you to be aware of that.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask our members, Tracy and Indiana, who have been somewhat quiet. Is there anything you want to share with or ask our colleagues here from Columbia's Planning School?
Well, the only thing I'm going to share, because I have a sick kid to get back to, is that I mean, you all have the joy to, as urban planners, to sort of watch neighborhoods change, right? Like you think the land is solid and everyone has decided on a thing, and we know what you do is a little bit of ethnography, anthropology, as well as also architecture, right? All rolled up in one, as much as and then based upon those things, figure out what's best for the city. So I was sort of dancing while you guys were talking about, I grew up on 162nd between St. Nick and Edgecombe, and I grew up knowing it was technically Washington Heights, but everybody called it Harlem. And then later on, I found out that the elders called it Sugar Hill. What's the right answer? D, all of the above. So I'm glad you were able to join us here, and you all have the luxury of hearing about neighborhoods from those that live in it. So I hope it was educational.
And I'm sorry that you can't see her because our system went down and it refuses to come back up. Indiana. Indiana's with Elvis, and Elvis has left the room. Okay, well.
Should we mention that all our resolutions are available online?
Well, not all of them, but a lot of them.
Most of them?
We have a hand up.
Should
I was gonna say, what has compelled each of you to decide to join this committee in particular?
Well, in my view,
To join the committee or the board?
Join this particular
Committee?
subcommittee of.
in my view, it's the most important committee on community board, and here's why. For the most part, other things can change, right? So you can say, all right, there is a licensing committee, for example, that deal with liquor license. Today, it's one liquor license. In 3 years, it's different. Things are changing. When it's come to land use, you have to be prepared to make decisions about things that will end up being constructed that will stay for the next 100 and maybe 200 years. And that will determine how the neighborhood change, right? And what kind of change, what are you trying to do? What kind of change you're trying to build here, and to whom? And you have to think about the next generation. So this is why, in my view, land use is the most important committee on the board. And I'm sorry, I don't want to, it's not that there is significant for all the other committees, obviously, but land use is the most profound one. That's why I wanted to be here.
Yeah, I feel pretty similarly. I think that what we do is so interdisciplinary in nature, right? Because we're talking about urban planning and zoning actions, and that touches on not just affordable housing, but all types of developments of businesses and like other types of property in the neighborhood. And I find that sort of balance of different ways of thinking about development interesting. And I'm an attorney by trade, and I think that the way that I'm able to apply my legal skills in this particular arena, I just find really interesting.
I sort of fell into a master's at Columbia in real estate development. I was working there and got talked into it by my boss instead of giving me a raise. And then having gotten into that, this seemed to be, you know, and realizing how much I was learning and, you know, how much I didn't know, even though I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I guess I saw this as the next basket of things that were related that I wanted to understand and had never thought about.
When one joins the community board, you typically have a few months to visit the various committees, see what they're doing, and, you know, then let the board leadership know which committees you're interested in joining, although based upon where their needs are, you might not get your first or second choice. I didn't have that opportunity. I was told that you're going to be on land use. I was told that you're going to chair it, and that was that. You know, I am a, you know, I have degrees in architecture and planning, and at the time I was, I said, with Harlem Community Development, heading their residential development, and it's like, great, you're doing land use, period, end of story. So that's how I got to this committee.
I got on this committee, I think it was because I was painting walls. And then after that, I sort of, it was looking at talking to the real estate person that gets the walls and all that stuff. So it was interesting to know that there was like section of the city just for like what commercial manufacturing and all that other stuff. I do want to like bounce off the sentiment of OC, where I do find it interesting that this is like probably like a very important one, because it changes the law on like how the buildings are being built. So I always like think about like, okay, what's a better building to build out over here? Like another school or another low housing, like residential or something like that. How big is it? How tall is it gonna be? Is it gonna have like nice windows, solar panels and all that stuff? Just even thinking about their project, I wonder what other like kind of like data sets like they were picking up, like let's say like the whole report that Mark Levine put out,
Housing Manhattan.
yeah, the Housing Manhattanites and all that stuff, because that thing has like a whole set list of what just the city even views all these like little neighborhoods and all that stuff, and even quite recently the whole city of Yes, just what is it, affordability, sustainability for like all the greenhouse and it was an economic one and all that stuff. And how is that also gonna affect the 5-10 years range from here on out and all that stuff? And just even thinking about it, like 5 years from now, it could be a whole bunch of like different people out over here. I don't know, I find the project to be like very interesting, and just like being able to go around, like, oh, like this neighborhood is more here, this neighborhood is more there, you know?
Jim?
Thank you. As Wayne pointed out, and it was true in his case in particular, he was specifically put on our community board because we needed someone with land use expertise, which he already had when he was appointed. But on most community boards, it's the board chair who decides who is on which committee. So you may just find yourself on a committee because we need somebody there. And you know, and often, as Daniel pointed out, I think others too, when you're on this alien committee, you suddenly notice that it's very interesting, and you ultimately are happy that you're there. In my mind, the two most technical committees in terms of complications are in fact land use with all the zoning complication, and I'm also on the traffic and transportation committee. And there too, there's all this traffic engineering. You don't just put up stop signs because you're in the mood. In fact, there's a list of, I think, 17 federal warrants. And if you want to put a stop sign up anywhere in the country and it doesn't meet one of these warrants, you're not allowed to. because that's, and so there's, and I enjoy that kind of stuff. I taught physics and computer science. So, and the other thing, as you may have noticed, and it's true of most of our committees, if not all of them, you get to learn to meet people from all over the community, and you learn to work together in a collegial manner. And I think it's just a wonderful thing. And if any of you end up residing here in New York, you might want to think of joining a community board.
Or even come and join us,
Tracy?
you know. I know.
Tracy, you're still muted.
I joined the community board because there's like a super wealthy guy that's been like keeping a strip of land as a big piece of mess in my neighborhood for way too long. And I decided to get active about it and join my community board, right, Miles? Yeah. So, yeah, I specifically asked for land use. And as I stated before, I was raised on going around this city and having the, this is my other boss, having, different sort of architectural as well as urban planning things pointed out to me. So this is also a point of interest, but really it's to fight the man.
Wait then. So Indiana, are you back with us?
Yes, apologies. I joined the other community board meeting that was going on for a second.
Ah,
So,
traitor.
sorry, I feel like I had put information about that meeting on Facebook and then everyone showed up. So I felt like I needed to also show up for that meeting. But I joined the community board because I was an attorney at a nonprofit, kind of similar to Legal Aid. It's called the New York Legal Assistance Group, and I was focused only on immigration work, but the other people that I worked with worked on housing issues. And so just talking to them about the fights, that they have every single day about things that are so outlandish, right? That people are dealing with in their apartments and their living situations. I couldn't even initially believe that, a landlord wouldn't fix things. That's kind of what initiated my interest in housing issues. But I think the longer I lived in New York City, the more experiences I had myself and challenges and people that I knew. I just wanted to get more involved in housing issues. And so I'm on the housing committee now, on the community board, but I wanted to learn about land use because it really struck me how so many, like the housing committee comes in after the building is built, after there are problems. And I wanted to be involved earlier on when, decisions are being made about what types of apartments are being built and try and influence the affordability rates. And so much of those conversations, I think communities are shut out of because they happen like, among some fancy developers and maybe some, elected officials. And so the community board was my like effort to try and be involved wherever I can in those conversations that hopefully happen as early on in the process as possible. Thank you.
Great. I want to add to prevent eminent domain as well soon.
Well, that's a different conversation. So it is.
To prevent eminent domain.
Yeah, well, we can have a whole, conversation on that and which developments throughout the city of New York were built using eminent domain. But the interesting thing is, speaking of reinterpretations, how, the courts changed, the definition of, the public good. And that has led to eminent domain being used in like for Columbia University, taking private land to give for private owner, which is not how it was used. Because that's a different conversation.
But that happened.
That is a scotch and cigarettes conversation. Or forget the cigarettes, let's just have the scotch. So it is pushing 8:30 and do we have any old or new business?
I make a motion to end.
I would, before that, I just wanted to say
I
that
thought you were gonna break into
it's been a-
Smokey Robinson. I second that emotion. But anyway.
this has been a wonderful seminar. And I think it was really very nice.
And as I said,
Sure.
you're welcome to come back, particularly as you further define your boundaries and what you're going to focus on. But I reiterate that you also want to touch base with our Housing and Human Services, since you're focused on, affordable housing. And I think it's, when I was in undergrad school, I finished my bachelor's at City College where her father taught. We had a couple of courses on sort of the development of affordable housing and looking at, going back to the beginning of the 20th century and maybe, how affordable housing, was approached and who was involved, some of the trade unions and others. It was interesting to look at what were the models used then, and are they still relevant today in the same way that you're talking about, revitalizing Mitchell-Lama. When I was at Harlem CDC, we had a lot of elected officials on our board. I said, we need Mitchell-Lama to come back. So Mitchell-Lama created a backbone of, middle income rental and limited equity housing throughout the city. And, when the 35-year period where they had to be in the program was over, some of them, may have stayed in the program because they were incentivized with new money to do renovations, but others bought out. And if you look at what happened to the development behind Lincoln Center, when that went private, it completely changed the profile of the Upper West Side.
Isn't it a call?
It's called per condo, but it's no longer a Mitchell-Lama. It's no longer, sort of middle income. The Upper West Side used to be, sort of artsy and musicians and affordable, big sprawling units. That is not the Upper West Side today. I think there was a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
It is 8:25. We are adjourned. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
I said we meet the first Wednesday of every month,
Except when we don't.
except when we don't, but that's only during the summer, July and August. So great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Good luck on your project.